Hello and welcome to my dungeon and this Dragonbane combat tutorial. The situation is as follows. Our group of intrepid adventurers has been ambushed by a band of goblin bandits. So we use the surprise rules. Everyone who is surprised at the start of combat gets the bottom initiative cards, 10 and up, randomly distributed among them. Everyone who is not surprised gets to draw normally. So a party can even have a combination if some of them manage their awareness rolls and some don't. Meaning the surprise party members draw initiative from the bottom and everyone who is not surprised draw initiative normally. For this combat we also use improvised weapons. So we select the relevant improvised weapons for a forest combat encounter, roll a d3, giving us 2 improvised weapons that can be found in this encounter, giving us a wasp nest and a boulder that the characters can use. The goblin scouts with initiative 1 go first. They have a tactic. Attack the biggest enemy first, which happens to be the wizard. The GM rolls 3 attacks, trying to roll under the goblin's skill with bows of 12. He rolls 2 hits and a demon, which is a critical failure. Rolling on the critical failure table, we get a 6, which means the goblin hits itself, and from its short bow it takes 3 damage. The wizard, who only got 11 hit points and would rather not be hit by a goblin, chooses to react and evades, rolling under his evasion value of 10. But using a reaction also uses your action unless you have special abilities, so we turn over the wizard's card. He's no longer going to act in this round of combat. Still, he can only defend against 1 attack, so 1 goblin rolls damage, a d10 base damage for the short bow plus a d4 damage bonus for its agility, giving us 10 damage. The wizard is barely left standing on his feet with 1 hit point remaining. But that finishes the initiative of the goblin scouts. Now it's the goblin warriors' turn. Rush in and attack the first thing that gets in their way. In this case, the Mallard Knight. Rolling both at once, we get 17 and 4. 1 hit. Not wanting to take the damage, the Knight defends, rolling for weapon parry with his shield, rolling under his axe skill of 14 with a 12. But using his reaction also costs him his turn. But that finishes the turn of the goblin warriors. Next up is the elf hunter at 7. She decides to use her twin shot ability that lets her attack 1 target with 2 arrows or 2 targets with 1 arrow, but she has to roll with a bane. Rolling 2 dice, taking the lower one, we get an 11, so she can roll damage for both targets. Rolling a d12 for the longbow and a d6 for the agility damage bonus, you get 8 damage once and 15 damage on the second goblin. So one of them lives, barely, and the other one dies instantly. The ranger then uses her movement to get into a bit of cover behind these rocks for all the good it will do her, and that finishes her turn. Last, at initiative 10, it's the halfling thief's turn. Since she doesn't do a lot of damage in a straight up fight, she decides to use the improvised weapon, the boulder. Basically, if you succeed in an acrobatics check, you and the enemy go prone to the ground and you do 2d6 of damage. With her acrobatics of 14, the check is no problem, and 9 damage is nothing to sneeze at. So her and the goblin warrior go down on the ground. That finishes her turn and this round of combat. For a normal initiative draw, you shuffle your 10 cards of the initiative deck, and then every player is supposed to draw a card for the initiative, but honestly just dealing out the cards is much faster. First to act in this round's initiative is the wizard with the number 1 initiative. But he decides he'd rather wait and see conserving his willpower point he needs for spells, and switches initiative with the ranger. So now it's the ranger's turn, and she decides to go onto that rock and just shoot the goblin scout that is still left standing. 15 doesn't hit, so she decides to push the roll. Get angry, mostly at herself for walking into a goblin ambush, and roll again. 13, that hits, if barely. That's another d12 plus a d6 damage, taking out the already wounded goblin. That finishes the ranger's turn. Initiative is back to the wizard at number 2. But he decides he still wants to wait and exchanges his initiative with the last one in the group, the halfling thief. So now it's her turn, and she decides to get up and stab the goblin warrior on the ground. Since he's prone, she attacks with advantage in the easy hit. Also, you deal a d6 extra damage to prone targets in melee. So it's a d8 for a weapon, d6 for a damage bonus, and another d6. And though they both were 1, it's more than enough to take out the already wounded goblin. That finishes her turn. Now at initiative 3, it's Mallard's turn. He decides just to hit the warrior in front of him with his battle axe. Straight up roll, normal hit, and the goblin warrior decides he'd like to parry that instead of dying, so he makes a check on his weapon to parry. Success! But we still roll the damage for the battle axe, 2d8 plus a d4 damage bonus from the ability, giving us 14 damage. That is more than the long spear's durability of 12, so the goblin warrior's weapon breaks in his hand. That finishes the knight's turn. Again, it's the wizard's turn, and since he is on 1 hit point, he decides to take out the last goblin archer with a level 2 fireball, investing 4 willpower points for a power level 2 spell, and then rolling on his elementalist skill, hitting the goblin, doing 3d6 damage. Nine damage is actually not enough to take the goblin out. Goblin has 9 hit points and an armor of 1, so still alive. The wizard books it behind the boulder. Now it's the goblin scout's turn, but with 1 hit point he decides to run away, and without a weapon in his hand, the warrior also flees from combat, thus ending this encounter in victory for the party. Another combat encounter, this time against a Minotaur in a dungeon, since monster combat works slightly different. The rogue tries to sneak up on the Minotaur, but fails and pushes the roll, getting scared. And understandably so. This time she manages to sneak up on the Minotaur, so she can perform sneak attack. She can choose an initiative card, so she chooses the 1. The rest of the combatants draw initiative normally. The Minotaur has ferocity 2, so the Minotaur gets 2 initiative cards. The thief does her sneak attack, attacking with advantage, scoring a critical hit. So she doubles the damage die of her weapon, rolling an additional d8. But she also gets an additional d8 from the sneak attack, rolling 3d8 plus 1d6 damage. 15 damage is a mighty opener for this combat, but this is a Minotaur. He's still alive and he's going at 2. The GM decides on monster attack number 2, rolling 2d6 for both damage and how far the thief is kicked away by the Minotaur, giving a 5. The thief is kicked away 5 meters and goes prone to the ground. That ends this turn of the Minotaur. Now it's the ranger's turn. She decides she wants to take out the Minotaur and uses her twin shot ability, rolling with a Bane, so she takes the higher result, an 8. Still a hit, so she can roll damage for 2 longbow attacks. 23 damage in total. Now this, together with the sneak attack, would be enough to kill a normal Minotaur, but this one is still standing, wounded, bleeding, but still standing. The hit points in the bestiary are only an average. Minotaur can have more or less hit points in different stats, and the GM decided to make this combat more interesting by giving the Minotaur a few more extra hit points. Now it's the wizard's turn, who decides to finish off the Minotaur with a mighty fireball. He rolls on his elementalist skill and fails. They push the roll, getting exhausted, and fail again. Sometimes the dice are not in your favor. This finishes the wizard's turn. Now it's the knight's turn. The knight rushes in, wanting to cover the downed thief, but one movement is not enough, so they dash, using their action for an additional movement, finishing their turn. Now it's the Minotaur's second turn. The GM rolls a d6 to discern which monster attack to make and gets a 5, a sweeping attack, hitting everyone in range, so just the mallard. They inflict weapon damage, which is 2d10 for a great axe, and luckily enough it's just 6, the same as the mallard's armor. And that finishes the Minotaur's second turn and this round of combat. Time to deal initiative again. At 2, the Minotaur opens this round of combat. The GM rolls again for what attack to do, getting a 5. Since we already had number 5, it instead becomes a number 6, a stomping attack. The Minotaur jumps up and comes down on the knight, inflicting 2d10 bludgeoning damage and knocking the knight prone. Since you can only evade monster attacks, unless stated otherwise, or you have a special ability to block them with your shield, and the knight only has evasion 5, he decides to just take the attack and let his armor soak up the damage. He's got a lot of hit points too, but this way he keeps his action. That finishes the first turn of the Minotaur. Now it's the thief's turn, and the group discusses and decides that whoever can do the most damage before the Minotaur acts again should do so. So the wizard invests 6 willpower points to cast another fireball. This time at power level 3. It's a success. Their maximum damage fireball does 4d6 damage, which is finally enough to knock the Minotaur out. And that finishes this example of combat. I hope this video is helpful to you. I wish thee safe travels, dreamers, until we shall meet again.